Good evening, everyone.
How are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay, so we're starting Bet and Gimel. Let's look at the tour. Right, so what we're saying here is like this. It says in the tour, another thing which is forbidden is to tilt the candle in order that the oil should go further away from the wick, because this is also a form of extinguishing, meaning to say that the flame gets weaker. So he says here therefore another thing, which is that you're not allowed to take a wick from a candle which is lit and then put it into a different candle. That's also extinguishing. Why is that? Because once he takes out the wick, removes the wick from the oil, it gets extinguished, right? So what do I care if he's going to light it afterwards, right? Right now it's going down, and then it'll go back up. But meanwhile, right, it's called extinguishing. Okay, so that's the tour. Let's go to Bet Yosef. Says Bet Yosef here. Yeah, it seems like there's more tour. We got to read a little bit more. Let's go back there and finish it. So he says here in the Torah, let's say he has a wax candle, right? And he wants to light it for Yom Tov. So he doesn't want the whole thing to get burned. He wants to save some of it. So he says you can put something around it which will prevent it from burning. So what does that mean? When the level gets to that place, it'll go out. The gram kibui mutar. So here we are, right? This is what I told you guys last week, which is that doing extinguishing by indirect causation is allowed. All right, so this is indirect causation. Meaning to say that it'll get there eventually, and when it gets there, it'll go out. But that's sometime in the future. So that we don't care about. Right? So this is a general rule, in the laws of Shabbat and also the laws of Yom Tov, that indirect causation, grama, is allowed. The Ashkenazim are a little bit more stringent about that, but it seems like in this case, right, we'll see. I don't think it applies here. So anyway, just to fill you in, right? What I mean to say by that is that it says in the Ramah in the laws of Shabbat that indirect causation, grama, is only allowed if there's going to be a financial loss, or it's going to be right some kind of a problem there. It's going to cause financial loss, or the other one is right. You're going to suffer. There's going to be some suffering there going on. That's the Ashkenazim. They're only lenient when it comes to things like this, but the Sfaradim are more lenient when it comes to indirect causation. They're lenient altogether, with no borders, right? With no. That's the way it is. Okay, so that will have some ramifications, but the truth is, I don't really know if this applies here in this case of Yom Tov, because the Ramah is stringent regarding Shabbat, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's stringent also regarding Yom Tov. So we'll see, right, what the Ramah says here. But anyway, that's the story there. So yeah, now we can see the Beit Yosef. So Beit Yosef, right, brings the source for this. Where is all this stuff? It's the second Perek Betzah, same page as we had last week. Ula ikla leve Rav Yehuda, right? So what happened was that Ula happened to be in the yeshiva of Rav Yehuda. Kam sham'e zakaf sharga et ative Rav Yehuda leula ונותן שמן בנר חייב משום מבעיר והמסתפק ממנו חייב משום מכבה. אמר למה דעתי. So Rav Yehuda gets up right away. What happened over here? That this candle of Ula, they did something here to extinguish it, right? They tilted it, whatever it was, as we said, right? So right away, Rabbi Yehuda got up and objected. He was like, can't do that. Right? You're extinguishing it like that when you tilt it. So he brings this source from the Talmud that says like this, right? That if you add oil to the candle, you are making it burn brighter. So you're like doing the labor of igniting a fire. And if you remove the oil from the candle, you are extinguishing the fire by removing the oil, even though there's still some oil left over there. But you're making the light weaker by doing that. So therefore, it's forbidden. So he brings the Rashi here. Peresh Rashi, zakef sharga, right? Shaya rotze shistalek hashemen leachorav v'lo yimashech achar hapetilah v'tichaber. Right. So, as we said, right, what happened? Rashi explains that what ignited, right, this rabbi, to object was the fact that he was tilting the candle to move the oil away from the wick, which is not allowed. So then he goes on. If he puts oil into the candle and adds oil into the candle on Shabbat, he's liable for igniting a fire, as we said, right? Because making it burn brighter. והמסתפק הנוטל ממנו באוכל חייב משום בחבר, right? So again, right, same thing. If he takes away the oil, he removes it, he's extinguishing, right? He's liable for that as well. So on Shabbat, this is like a big no-no, right? Cannot do this. And also on Yom Tov, right? Same thing. We cannot do that. Same thing, right? The only thing we allowed in the Torah was to do grama, right? Indirect causation. But directly to do it, no, cannot do it. Cannot do that. Okay. So let's go on a little bit. Chayav mishum mechaber, right? Is liable for extinguishing. But kibui b'yom tov lo ishtare, right? So look what Rashi says, right? Extinguishing on Yom Tov is not allowed. Don't think it is. It's not. Right? So כתבו, התוספות, זה תוספות, והמסתפק ממנו חייב משום מכבה. אינו רוצה לומר מפני שממהר כיבוי, זה לא הווה אלא גרם כיבוי. So Tosfot explains, right? When you remove the oil from the candle, or you tilt it away, he says, it doesn't mean that you're making it go out faster, earlier. It's not the problem. The problem is you're extinguishing it right now. And therefore it's not grammar, right? It's not indirect causation. So that's what it's saying, right? Explaining that. Because as we said, right, indirect causation with the extinguishing on Yom Tov is allowed. So that's what it says, right? Right, even though it's going to go out earlier, yes, it's going to go out earlier, right? But that's allowed. And so now you guys, right? I'm going to give you the correlation over here, right, to modern times. So what I want to tell you is like this, right? This is the reason why you're allowed to play with the clock, the timer. If you have a timer going on Shabbat or Yom Tov, so you can make it go out a little bit earlier, even though it won't go out now. It's going to be grama, indirect causation. So if you move the clock a little bit, right, or you move the pegs a little bit, it's going to go a little bit earlier. That's okay. You can do that because it's not going out right now. It'll go out in 15 minutes, half hour, whatever it is, right? That's okay. So that's why you're allowed to play with the clock a little bit, right? Move it around here, right? To extinguish it earlier or to ignite it earlier, also same thing, right? Doesn't really matter. It's all the same. As long as you're not doing it right now. Okay. So then he goes on. אף על פי שכיבוי בשבת נמי אינו חייב אלא היינו דמה הואיל ובאותה שעה שהוא מסתפק ממנה מחבק קצת ומכסה אורו ולא יכול להנהורי, right? So he says, right, that also on Shabbat is the same thing. In other words, you're not liable for doing indirect causation, right? It's also the same. So then he goes on to say, when you remove the oil as well, right, you're extinguishing it. That's also right now you're extinguishing it, not later on. So it cannot light as brightly, it cannot burn as brightly as it was before when you remove the oil. Why? Because now you have less oil in there, right? So it burns less. Just give me 1 second. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. Hello? Yes. Okay. Yeah, I'm in the middle of the shir right now. I'll be finished at 9:15, half hour. Yes, I'm in the middle of the shir right now. I'll be finished 9:15. Yes. Yes. I'm home already. I'm home. Yeah. Okay. God bless. Sorry about that. So if it wasn't urgent, I wouldn't have picked it up. But anyway, right? So as we said, so because there's less oil in the candle, says Tosfot, it's going to burn less bright, and therefore that's called extinguishing. מכאן יש להתיר קנדילה של שעווה גדולה לחתוך למטה ממנה, כיוון דבשעה שחותך אותה אינו מכחיש מאור שלה כלל, אף על פי שהוא גורם לגרום כבייה, שהרי ודווקא להתיר אותה באור, אבל בסכין אסור אליבא דכולי עלמא. So, right, Tosfot says, therefore, right, as we said in the tour, similar kind of thing, that since, if you have a wax candle, right, and you remove some of the candle from below, so that will be okay. Why? Because that's not going to change the brightness of the candle. So that only happens with oil, right? That you're changing the brightness by removing it or adding it. But when it comes to a wax, which is solid, it's not going to affect it, by removing the bottom of the candle. It'll go out earlier, but it's not going to extinguish anything right now. So it says, but Tosfot says, right? But don't cut it with a knife, he says. The wax. He says you got to do it with some other way, right? Using fire. Okay. All right. Well, we'll see what that means. But anyway, the Amina and the Kaman Matnitin, right? So I think I understand why. I think I understand why Tosfot says not to do it with a knife. Probably because you're making a utensil like that, It's like cutting a piece of paper, whatever, right? For usage. If you want to use the paper, right? So you cannot cut it. So same thing here, right? That's what Tosfot is saying. Don't cut the candle with a knife because you're making a utensil there. Okay, something like that. So then it goes on. Right? This is what it says in Mordechai. בצאתם דהך חייב משום מכבה כשנוטל השמן מכחיש מאור הנר. And so he says that, as we said, right, when he removes the oil, he's making it weaker, right? בדבר זה לא שייך אליו בשמן. So he says again, right, same thing, that this only applies to oil. אבל אם יש חתיכות של חלב ויסיר חתיכה אחת מן הנר או פתילה של שעווה וחתיכה באור, כיוון דאין כאן אלא גרם כיבוי, אין כאן איסור, right? So here also, right, says the same thing, that if you have like a solid candle, like right, wax, or in those days they used to make it out of fat. Nowadays we have like paraffin, Oh, it's all the same, right? It's all the same idea. Since it's solid, so if you cut the bottom of it, it won't extinguish the top. It'll just make it go out earlier, which is okay. So everybody agrees over here, right, that you're allowed to do this. The Tur, the Mordechai, right, Tosfot, and these are all Ashkenazi rabbis, by the way. And so it looks like they're lenient about this. Okay, whatever, right? So לכן כתוב בהגות בהמון פרק ד' בהגות שלי, כתוב אם חתיכות קטנות של החלב דולק ונותן לאחד מהן מחתיכות הרחוקות מן הפתילה, אין נראה שיהיה חייב בממיהו, לכתחילה אסור לעשות כן בין בשבת בין ביום טוב, וכן לחתוך מן הנר של שעווה בשעת שהוא דולק מאור זרוע, right? So there's one that says, another rabbi who says לכתחילה you shouldn't do this, right? But he's not liable on it. Okay, so that's a different opinion. והראש כתב שמסתפק ממנו חייב משום מכבה, הדחשיב למכבה, היינו משום כשממעט השמן מרחיקו מפי הנר, כהה אור נר, ואין דולק יפה כבתחילה, והבה למכבה, ואין לפרש משום שממהר כביית הנר, כשיכלה השמן דהיינו גרם כיבוי, שנחלקו רבי יוסף וחכמים דזן. עושים okay, so Right, so the Rosh is saying the same thing as we just said, right? In Tosfot. The same exact concept. So then he goes on, right? It says like this: "V'nechlaku Rabbi Yosef v'Chachamim." These two rabbis had an argument. The Tan and the Mishnah, "Osin mechitza b'kol hakelim ben mileim ben rikanim." So, right, the one opinion says that you're allowed to make a partition with any kind of utensil, whether it's empty or full, b'shvil shelo ta'avor adlika, in order that the fire shouldn't pass by there, right? So again, right, it's indirect causation by way of extinguishing something by placing some barrier, that shouldn't go further than that, the fire. Okay. Rabbi Yosef forbids this when it comes to clay, chadashim, new clay, full, if it's full of water. Why is that? Because it cannot tolerate the fire, the flame, and therefore it'll explode. It'll extinguish the fire. So it's behold, like the rabbis, the gram kibui mutar, right? That indirect causation when extinguishing is allowed. But it says when it comes to a tube, right, by on top of the candle, I'm not allowed to do that because you may come to use it. I know. על כן, הכל כך מפני שממהר כיבוי של מכחיש מאור הנר כלל, שהרי הנר לעולם מלא שמן, כי מן השופרת מטפטף תמיד לאור הנר, אף אם נסתפק מעט משמן שבתוך השופרת, אין המכחיש מאור הנר, ילקח נראה לי, דתמה דמסתפק מן הנר משום דמשמר כיבויו, ואף רבנן דרבי יוסף מודו גרם כיבוי, דהיינו זה חייב, זה עד כאן לא פליגי אתם אלא משום דאינו נוגע בדבר דולק, אלא עושה חוצה לו, דבר גורם לכיבוי, משתגיע שמה הדליקה, אבל משעשמן שפתילה בשניהם דרמים דליקה, שמאחד מהם ממהר את הכיבוי, ואין ליטול פתילה דולקת, מנר הזה ליתן בנר אחר, ומיד שסילקה מן הנר, אבל מכבה, ומה הועיל את אם חזר בדליקה, right? So the Rosh also makes here another point, extending this whole thing, right? Which is something like in the middle, the two cases that we brought, which is that let's say you have oil, right? And there's like a candle, and there's like a tube connected to it. So the tube is not really a part of the candle itself, but the Rosh says since it's all one body of oil, right? Together, they're all connected. So therefore, he says you shouldn't remove it from a tube either, even though you're not really actually removing it from the candle. He's stringent about that. That's very interesting. Okay, very interesting case there. When you the candila shel sha'ava be'odal dolek asur lechatcho ושניים אף אם חתכו באור, כיוון שעשה מעשה בשעבה או פתילה חשיב כמחבה ואסור. So he says, right, but Yosef, that it seems like the Rosh would be stringent even in the case of the wax candle, which is hard. He wouldn't allow you to do that. So it says, doesn't resemble the case of the wick, which is allowed to cut the ore with the fire. So shani hatam because when it comes to he cut it, but or with the fire, it wasn't lit yet. The let be mishum mechabe. So there's no right issue of extinguishing there. So he says, this is the words of Rabbeinu, the Tur, right? That didn't find any way to allow, right, to regarding wax candles, to allow this. The only thing he says you can do is to put something which is going to prevent it, some kind of barrier, right, from getting there, the fire, right, to that wax. But to actually remove the wax, right, he's stringent like the Rosh, to cut the wax. כמו שנראה כלומר נר של שעבה שרוצה להדליקו ביום טוב משמע כשרוצה להדליקו בידיים לא ידליק מהרה אבל אם הייתה דלוקה כבר אינו יכול לעשות שום תיקון וכן משמע בדברי הראש כשכתבתי. So But Yosef is explaining, right, that the Torah is going like the Rosh, who says that once you lit the candle, right, and it's all one body, you're not allowed to cut it anymore. The Rosh is stringent about that. So we did see, right, several poskim who are really lenient, the Tosfot, the Mordechai, right, but on the other hand, right, the Rosh seems to be stringent about this. Okay, interesting. So then he goes on, כתב מורדכי פרק כל כתבן. says מורדכי שיש מתירים ביום טוב לצאת סכין או כלי או דבר הניטל על הנר של השעבה שלא במקום הדלקת הדלקתה שאינו אלא גרם כיבוי. So he says, right, some people allow this, to cut the wax, right, as we said. אבל רבנו יואל פירש אפילו ביום טוב לא שרינן. But this rabbi says we don't even allow this on יום טוב. גרם כיבוי to do indirect causation. לכתחילה. It's only when it's danger involved, right? So now we're coming to the Ramah, right? It was actually which I told you in the laws of Shabbat, that he only allows indirect causation in places of damage, financial loss, right? Things like this, right? Suffering, blah blah blah. So that seems to be the same idea here. Kitab Ran says the Ran. That which we said, right, that if he takes the oil, removes the oil, he's liable because of extinguishing. But he says if you want to add more wicks, right, they said you're allowed. So it's all light, whatever, it's all fire. If you don't say so, you wouldn't be able to light 2 wicks in a candle. With one candle. Therefore, for sure it's allowed, it says. So in other words, what is the Ran saying here? Just to recap, right? This concept. He's telling you that even according to the ones, even according to what we said, that you're not allowed to remove the oil, right? As the candle is burning, because you're extinguishing. But what you are allowed to do is to add more wicks, he says. So why is that? Because you're just making it burn brighter, right? And that's no problem because you want more light on Yom Tov. You want more light? Let there be light, right? What's the problem, right? There's no prohibition to add more light. Okay, that's the story, right? Obviously on Shabbat that wouldn't be the case. We're talking about on Yom Tov. Okay, good. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch, right? And we'll see what the bottom line is over here, right? With all this stuff, all these opinions here. So we got to do Bet and Gimel. Okay, Shulchan Aruch. Let's go for it. Yeah, so says Shulchan Aruch, להטות נר כדי להרחיק השמן מן הפתילה, right? To tilt the candle in order to distance, right? To move away the oil from the wick, חשיב כיבוי ואסור. It's considered to be extinguishing, and therefore it's forbidden. לכן אסור לקח פתילה מנר הדלוק. This is also another thing, which is you're not allowed to take the wick, right, from a light lit candle, to remove it from there, even if you want to put it in a different candle. Because why? Once he removes it, right, he's extinguishing it right there on the spot. So therefore, right, it's not allowed to do that. So what do we see here, right? That you're not allowed to extinguish on Yom Tov, just for for kicks, Well, there has to be as we said, right, a very strong reason for that, especially when you're doing it directly like this, right? As we said, yeah. So you gotta be careful with that. So what do you see from that, right? That partial extinguishing is also called extinguishing. You shouldn't think you have to extinguish it all the way. That's clear. So says the Rama, right? ומותר להוסיף פתילות לנר דולק כדי שיבעיר הרבה ויכבה מהר. So it says, right, the Rama, if you want to add more wicks but make it brighter, there's no prohibition with that. You want to have more light on Yom Tov, right? Why not? You can do that. Right? It's like, somebody who wants to light on Yom Tov, let's say he wants to light 10 candles, right, instead of 2, He wants to have more light, so he can do that. It's not really a problem. No. Okay. So says the Rama here. Yeah, we just read it. Okay, I'm sorry. We just read the Rama. So let's go to the next one. So near Shel Shava Shirotzel Ladliko B'Yom Tov. So it says, right, that Shulchan Aruch, next one, Gimel. If you have a candle which is made out of wax, right, which is hard wax, right, and he wants to light it on Yom Tov, but he doesn't want to burn the whole thing, right? He wants to leave some over, So what do you do, right? According to what we saw in the tour, he says that you can put a barrier, so the wick shouldn't go further than that, and it'll stop there. So this way you will only burn a part of the candle and not the whole thing, right? That's your goal. You don't want to burn the whole thing. So therefore you can put a barrier there. And it'll go out earlier because of that. That's okay, indirect causation, right? No problem. So that's the Shulchan Aruch. Now comes the Rama and brings the other opinions we saw in the Beit Yosef, right? So he says here, "V'yesh matirim lachtoch ner shel shava ba'ur." So, right, some allow to cut the candle, which is made out of wax, with the fire, right? Da'inu shemadlikin gam lemata kedei lekatza. So you light it like below in order to shorten it. So the Rama says, right, the custom is to be lenient regarding doing it with a fire, right, but not with a knife, right, as we said. Because when you cut it with a knife, you're making like a new utensil there. Cutting it down to size, right, which is not allowed. So therefore it says you can do it with a fire. So you see, right, that it seems like on Yom Tov, even the Ashkenazim are lenient, right, when it comes to this, to do indirect causation. Okay, well, that makes sense because Shabbat is more stringent, right? Because over there it can be, from the Torah, this labor, right? Over here on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, it's only from the rabbis, this whole thing. So it's not exactly the same thing. Anyway, then he goes on. Says the Ramah here, "V'yesh matirim lachtoch ner." We said this already. Next one. Right? Then he says, "Aval al yedei sakim." Right? Then he goes on. "Umutar le'amid ner b'makom she'aruach sholet." Right? Oh, look what it says. Right? Interesting. Says the Ramah. Oh, wow, this is interesting. So it says you can put the candle in a place where there's wind. There. So it'll go out. But if the wind is already blowing, he says you cannot do that. So you get the point over here. It's very interesting to understand this, right? Very important. The Ramah says like this, right? If you want to put your candle out on Yom Tov, what you can do is put it in a place where the wind will come, right? And blow it out. That's also indirect causation. There's going to be a delay there. But what you cannot do, he says, right, is to put it in a place where the wind is already blowing, because that's direct causation. That's already direct. So that you can't do, right? So you see from here that the Rama allows, right, indirect causation. Pretty much it's the story there. Okay. So yeah, it's interesting that the Shulchan Aruch here seems to be, right, a little bit more stringent than the Rama, because he only brings the opinion of the Rosh, right, that allows indirect causation when you have a barrier, like the two roads. But the Rama seems to be a little bit more lenient there, right, to do it with a fire, which is like Tosfot. So here's the interesting thing, right? That here the Shulchan Aruch seems to pass like the Rosh, and the Rama seems to pass like Tosfot, which is a little bit more lenient there. Interesting, right? But on Shabbat, just the opposite, right? The Shulchan Aruch is much more lenient than the Rama when it comes to indirect causation. Okay, well that's a different case, though, over there, But as a general rule, right? It's very interesting. Okay, indirect causation, grammar, right? Grammar. So where's the source for this, by the way? Indirect causation is allowed. Where does it say that it's allowed? So it's in the Gemara, Masechet Shabbat, right? It says there, "Melacha de asura, grama share," right? It says, right, the labor is forbidden, but indirect causation is allowed. So what does that mean? Indirect causation is not called labor, really. That's the thing, right? Interesting. Not called labor. Therefore, it's allowed. Okay. And by the way, the thing is like this, that once you allow indirect causation when it comes to extinguishing, right, that means you can allow it also for other labors as well. So it really applies to all the labors, indirect causation, that it's allowed. Okay, good. So let's go to David. So uh, let's read the tour. Ner Shachaba. Yeah, so says the tour here. Ner Shechaba mutar לחתוך ראש הפתילה כדי שיהיה נוח לדלק. So he says like this, right, that a candle, right, which went out, extinguished, you're allowed to cut, he says, the wick, cut it down the size. That it should be easier to light next time. ולא חשיב כתיקון mana, right? So that's not considered like making a kli, making a utensil. Interesting, right? We said you cannot count the candle, right? With a knife, but here he allows you to cut the wick. So the question is, right, what's the difference between this and that? It seems to be like the same thing. So we got to see, right, what the difference is here. So that's only if he wants to light it up again that night. But if he wants to do it the next night, also the second night of diaspora, Yom Tov diaspora, right? After Shabbat, it's not allowed. Shirei Petila Shikavu, the remainders of the wick which went out, בראשון, the first night, שבמה שקבע בראשון, הוכנו להדליק בו בפעם השני. Because that which it went out the first time, that makes it ready to go the next time. והבלה מכין בשבת ליום טוב. So they're preparing from Shabbat to Yom Tov. Wow. ואסור, אם לא שהודלק בנכבה. It's going to be forbidden, it says, unless it was lit and put out, מערב Shabbat on Erev Shabbat. Okay, that's it. Wow. Okay, so let's see Bet Yosef here. So Bet Yosef brings a source for this, right? This halacha, Bet Betzah, right? Second perek of Betzah, Sham, same place. Amar Rav Yehuda, Kin ba share uperesh Rashi, right? Rabbi Yehuda says this aloud. Rashi explains, what does that mean? Limchot rosh hapetila shenaseh pecham shekorin mokia, right? So you're allowed to cut the head of the wick in order to make it light better next time, faster, whatever. Because what Tosfot says, the lo nehera, so it says, it doesn't make sense. Why? Because later on, different page, right? Karele mochatin taner lekach nireh tare chitui yesh אחד בשעת שדולק, והיינו, העיד דלקמן, ויש אחד לאחר שקבע. So it says Tosfot, right? There's two different Gemaras. One allows it and one doesn't allow it. So therefore he says the way to reconcile is that one is talking about, well, it's still lit. You cannot cut the wick. But once it goes out, you can cut it. That's how he reconciles it to the contradiction here. Okay. חיטוי יש אחד ושדלג והיינו שדלגון ויש אחד ואחד שקבע שדלגון כדי שידלג מהמהר מסיר הפחם בשבראש הפתילה וכך נוח שידלג אותה והיינו ההוא דאח גם בראש. So that's also right, that's allowed, as we said, it explains it. And then it says Bet Yosef, that's the same thing as what the Rosh said, and Katav the in lo perush Rashi. He says, I don't agree with the explanation of Rashi. Miatam shkatvu Tosfot, according to what it says in Tosfot, ela nireh kemo shepiresh Aruch. It seems like the Aruch is a more correct version of this. Achar shekava ner, we're talking about after nail, right? The candle was extinguished. Then we can cut the wick. Which got burned, right? So what is it coming to teach you, right? What's the novel idea here? That you're not making a new utensil like that. Because what you're doing is you're preparing the wick in order that it should be ready to light. That's only if he wants to light it that night. Right, that's the end of the Rosh. פירוש באותו יום, אבל מתקן ביום טוב לחברו, אסור. So explains Bet Yosef, right? What does that mean? You can light it for tonight or for tomorrow, right, morning, but not for the next night, because you'll be preparing from one day to another, which we said, right? You're not allowed to do. On Yom Tov, all the more so if you're preparing from Yom Tov to weekday, right? Monday day. Okay, so that's the story there. Then it goes on here. Okay, there's more. Okay, it's a long one, so maybe we'll do this next time. Let's see. Let's see Shulchan Aruch, how long it is here. So it says here the Shulchan Aruch like this. Let's say a candle went out and he wants to light it up the same day, right? You're allowed to cut it in order to be easier to light. So yeah, so again, right? What are we saying here? That you're not considered to be making a new kli, new utensil here by way of that. So why is that, by the way? Can we explain this? Why is this not considered to be making a new utensil? Let's see how Mishnah Berurah explains it. Interested to see that. And so Mishnah Berurah says something interesting, right? He makes a nice differentiation here, which is like this. He says that when we say you're allowed to cut the top of the wick, he's talking about the burnt part, right? Because why? When you cut the burnt part, it makes it easier to light next time. So you're not making a new utensil. Basically, you're just readying this utensil. You're just readying it for usage. You're not making something new. Because that burnt part is not really something usable. We don't want that. It's like refuse, But he says, right, if you're cutting the actual body of the wick, the part which is not burnt, so he says there it should be forbidden. That's what he says. Interesting. And he says, right, that it's written later on also in the Shulchan Aruch, this whole thing. Okay, interesting, right? So, in other words, the bottom line is like this, right? That the Mishnah Berurah is telling you that you can cut only the burnt part, because that's what you need to do in order to make it light faster next time. And also, it's not considered to be like you're making a new utensil. You're just readying this one to go. That's what it is. Interesting concept. Okay, so I guess we'll stop there, B'ezrat Hashem, and we'll continue next time, which will be sometime. Tomorrow I'm traveling, so B'ezrat Hashem, I'll let you guys know what my situation is. Right, tomorrow, not very likely, but maybe the next day, right, the Wednesday. So B'ezrat Hashem, Tuesday, right? So we'll see what happens. I gotta get my schedule going there, right? And we'll see what happens there. I'll let you guys know. Okay, so meanwhile, B'ezrat Hashem, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Later, have a good night, B'ezrat Hashem, and all right. So B'ezrat Hashem, going to the Holy Land to see. Let's see what happens over there. what Hashem has in store for us there. B'ezrat Hashem. So yeah, B'ezrat Hashem. Should be back next week, as we said, right? Next Wednesday. So meanwhile, I'll try to do something with you guys, when I'm there. I should have Wi-Fi. There's no problem, so we just have to work out the schedule. Okay, God bless. Thank you very much.
Safe travels, Rabbi.
God bless. God bless. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a safe trip.
Thank you. God bless.